Martinez had been cleaning office buildings in downtown Chicago for 15 years. Every morning at 4:30, her alarm would buzz in the tiny apartment she shared with her teenage son. The cold October wind cut through her thin jacket as she waited for the bus that would take her to the Millennium Tower, one of the tallest buildings in the city. Worked for Sparkle Clean Services, a company that paid minimum wage and offered no benefits. She had tried many times to find better work, but without a college degree and with limited English, her options remained narrow. Still, she never complained, believed that honest work was dignified work, no matter what others might think. The Millennium Tower housed the headquarters of Industries, one of the largest investment firms in the country, had been assigned to clean the executive floors for the past 3 years. She knew the routines of the wealthy executives, their expensive suits hanging in their offices, their imported coffee machines, and their marble bathrooms that cost more than most people made in a year. Richard owned the company his grandfather had started in the 1920s. At 62 years old, Richard had built an empire worth over $8 billion. He lived in a mansion in Lincoln Park with his wife and had homes in the Hamptons, Aspen, and Monaco. The business magazines called him a genius. The society pages featured pictures of him at charity galas and exclusive events. But behind the polished image, Richard carried a pain that money could never heal. 23 years ago, his daughter Emma had vanished without a trace. Emma had been born when Richard was 39 years old. She was the light of his life, a curious and spirited child with bright blue eyes and golden hair. Emma loved to paint, read adventure stories, and ask endless questions about everything she saw. Richard would spend hours with her, reading bedtime stories and answering her questions about the stars, the ocean, and why people sometimes seemed sad. When Emma turned 3, Richard went through a bitter divorce. The custody battle was vicious and public. Lawyers fought over every detail of Emma's life, demanded full custody, and threatened to move to California with Emma. Richard fought back with his own team of attorneys. During one particularly heated court session, stormed out of the courtroom with Emma. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. The police investigation lasted for months. Private detectives searched across the country and internationally. Richard offered a $10 million reward for information leading to Emma's safe return. Psychics, con artists, and well-meaning strangers called with tips that led nowhere. The FBI joined the search, but even with their resources, no trace of Emma ever surfaced. Richard never stopped looking. He kept Emma's bedroom exactly as she had left it. Her stuffed animals sat on the bed, her crayons remained scattered on her little desk, and her favorite book about dragons stayed open to the page they had been reading together. Every year on Emma's birthday, Richard would buy her a present and place it in her room, hoping somehow she would return to claim it. The disappearance changed Richard completely. He threw himself into his work, building his company into a massive corporation. He twice, but both marriages ended quickly. He donated millions to organizations that helped find missing children. He funded new technologies for child safety and supported laws that would make it harder for parents to disappear with their children. But late at night, when the business deals were finished and the meetings were over, Richard would sit in his study and stare at the last photograph taken of Emma. In the picture, she was laughing as she fed ducks at Lincoln Park Zoo. Her small hand was reaching toward the camera as if she was trying to touch her father through the glass. Knew nothing about Richard's personal life. To her, he was just another executive who sometimes worked late. She had seen him a few times in the elevator, always in expensive suits, always looking serious. He nodded politely when he saw her, but they had never spoken. Focused on her work, she took pride in making everything spotless. The marble floors reflected the ceiling lights perfectly after she finished mopping. The windows sparkled without a single streak. The conference rooms smelled fresh and looked ready for important meetings. Her favorite part of the job was the quiet time in the early morning when the building was empty. She could work at her own pace and think about her plans for future. Was determined that her son would go to college. She had been saving money for years, keeping it in a coffee can hidden in her bedroom closet. Every week, she added whatever she could spare to college fund. Was 17 and a senior in high school. He was smart and just like his mother. He played basketball for his school team and maintained good grades despite working part-time at a grocery store to help with family expenses. Dreamed of becoming an engineer and building bridges that would connect communities. His husband had died in a construction accident when he was 8 years old. The insurance company fought the claim for 2 years before finally paying a small settlement that barely covered the funeral costs. Since then, had raised a loan, working multiple jobs to keep them afloat. On Tuesday morning, October 15th, arrived at work earlier than usual. There had been a problem with the heating system in her apartment building, and she decided it was better to start work early rather than sit in a cold apartment. The security guard let her into the building at 4 in the morning. Began her routine on the 40th floor, where the senior executives had their offices. She cleaned Richard's office first, as she always did. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan. Expensive artwork covered the walls, and a massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. As dusted the desk, she noticed that Richard had left several photographs scattered across the surface. This was unusual because his desk was normally perfectly organized. Carefully moved the photos to clean underneath them. She couldn't help but notice that all the pictures showed the same young girl with hair and blue eyes. In one photo, the girl was maybe 2 years old, sitting on a swing and laughing. In another, she appeared to be around 3, wearing a pink dress and holding a stuffed elephant. Smiled at the pictures, thinking how beautiful and happy the child looked. She assumed they were photos of a granddaughter or niece. Finished cleaning the office and moved on to the next floor. She worked steadily through the morning, completing her assigned areas before the first employees arrived. By 7:30, she was finished with her shift and ready to head home. As waited for the elevator, she heard the familiar sound of the early morning garbage truck rumbling in the alley behind the building. The building's dumpsters were located in a narrow space between the Millennium Tower and the smaller building next door. Usually didn't pay attention to the garbage pickup, but today something seemed different. The truck was taking longer than usual, and she could hear the workers talking loudly. Their voices sounded concerned, not like the usual casual conversation of people doing routine work. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to take a quick look. She took the elevator to the ground floor and walked through the building's service entrance that led to the alley. 2 garbage workers were standing next to one of the large dumpsters, both looking upset and confused. "Should we call someone?" one of them was saying. "I don't know, man. This is really weird," the other replied. Approached them cautiously. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The workers turned toward her. One was a middle-aged African-American man named, who had seen many times over the years. The other was younger and looked nervous. "Right," said, "you work upstairs." "Yes, I clean the offices. What's wrong?" Pointed toward the dumpster. "We found something strange. It's not garbage exactly, but it was buried under a bunch of bags." Stepped closer to the dumpster. Reached in and carefully pulled out a large cardboard box. The box was old and water-damaged, but it had been wrapped in several layers of plastic bags that had protected most of the contents. "Should we open it?" the younger worker asked. "I think we better see what's inside," said. "If it's something dangerous, we need to know." Carefully cut through the plastic with a knife from his tool belt. Inside the cardboard box was another, smaller box made of metal. This box was locked, but the lock was old and rusty. Was able to break it open with a screwdriver. Gasped when she saw what was inside. The metal box contained dozens of items that clearly belonged to a young child. There were small pieces of clothing, including a pink dress that looked expensive. There were toys, including a stuffed elephant that looked identical to the one had seen in the photograph on Richard's desk. There were also several items that seemed more personal and important. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in what had once been a white blanket, was a birth certificate. The name on the certificate was Emma, born March 15, 23 years ago. The father was listed as Richard J. His hands began to shake as she realized what they had discovered. These were the belongings of Richard's missing daughter, the girl in the photographs upstairs, the child who had disappeared over 20 years ago. But why were Emma's things in a dumpster behind the building where her father worked? How had they gotten there? And what did this mean about what had happened to Emma all those years ago? And his partner exchanged worried looks. "This is way above our pay grade," said. "We need to call the police." Nodded, but her mind was racing. She thought about Richard sitting in his office every day, surrounded by memories of his missing daughter. She thought about the pain he must carry, not knowing what had happened to Emma or whether she was still alive. "Wait," said. Before we call the police, maybe we should tell Mister these are his daughter's things. He has a right to know first. Considered this. Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe the police should handle everything. I clean his office, said. I've seen the pictures. I know how much this means to him. We can call the police after we tell him, but he should see this first. The three of them carefully carried the boxes to a secure storage room in the building's basement. Asked to wait while she went upstairs to find Richard. It was now 8:15 in the morning. Knew that Richard usually arrived at his office around 8:30. She took the elevator to the 40th floor and waited near the reception area. When Richard stepped off the elevator, approached him nervously. She had never spoken directly to him before, and she wasn't sure how to explain what they had discovered. "Excuse me, mister," she said quietly. Richard looked surprised to see her. "Yes, is everything all right?" Took a deep breath. "My name is Martinez. I clean your office. We found something this morning that I think belongs to you, something very important." Richard's expression became serious. "What kind of something?" "It's about your daughter, sir, about Emma." The color drained from Richard's face. For a moment, was afraid he might collapse. He gripped the wall for support and stared at her with a mixture of hope and terror. "What about Emma?" he whispered. "We found some of her things, her belongings from when she was little. They were in a box behind the building." Richard closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Show me," he said. Led Richard to the basement storage room where was waiting with the boxes. When Richard saw Emma's stuffed elephant, he picked it up with trembling hands and held it against his chest. "This was her favorite toy," he said, his voice breaking. "She called him Mr. Peanuts because of his gray color. She took him everywhere." Richard examined each item carefully. The pink dress, the birth certificate, a small silver bracelet with Emma's name engraved on it. Everything was exactly as he remembered from 23 years ago. "Where did you find these?" he asked. Explained how they had discovered the boxes in the dumpster. Richard listened intently, asking questions about the exact location and the condition of the items. "This changes everything," Richard said finally. "If Emma's things were here in Chicago, then maybe." He couldn't finish the sentence, but understood what he was thinking. Maybe Emma had been in Chicago all along. Maybe she was still alive somewhere in the city. Richard called his personal attorney and asked him to contact the FBI immediately. He also hired a private security team to guard the building and make sure no evidence was disturbed. Within 2 hours, the alley was filled with investigators, forensic experts, and police officers. Gave her statement to the police, explaining exactly how she had found the boxes. The investigators were thorough and professional, but could tell they were excited about the discovery. This was the first real evidence in the Emma case in over 2 decades. Richard asked to stay while the investigation continued. He wanted to make sure she was available if the police needed to ask her any more questions, but suspected there was another reason. Richard seemed to find comfort in her presence, as if she was somehow connected to this miracle discovery. As the day wore on, the investigation expanded. Police dogs searched the entire building and surrounding area. Forensic specialists examined every inch of the dumpster and the alley. FBI agents interviewed building employees and reviewed security footage from nearby businesses. The media arrived by afternoon. News vans lined the street outside the Millennium Tower. Reporters tried to interview anyone connected to the case, but Richard's security team kept them away from and the other building workers. By evening, the story was national news. Billionaire's missing daughter, new evidence found after 23 years, appeared on every major news website and television station. The photographs of Emma as a 3-year-old were shown alongside current pictures of Richard. Finally went home around 8 o'clock that night. Was waiting for her with dinner, worried because she was so much later than usual. "Mama, what happened? You look exhausted." Sat down at their small kitchen table and told about the discovery. Listened with wide eyes, asking questions about Richard and what might happen next. "Do you think they'll find her, Mama? Do you think Emma is still alive?" Looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, if the investigators were right, Emma might be living her life as a 26-year-old woman with no idea who she really was. "I don't know," said, "but I hope so, I really hope so." That night couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the expression on Richard's face when he held Emma's stuffed elephant. She thought about the years of pain he had endured, never knowing what had happened to his daughter. Also thought about her own son, and how devastated she would be if ever disappeared. She couldn't imagine going 23 years without knowing whether he was safe or happy or even alive. The next morning, arrived at work to find the Millennium Tower surrounded by even more media and police. The investigation was expanding, and FBI agents were interviewing everyone who worked in the building. When reached the 40th floor, she found Richard waiting for her near the elevators. He looked like he hadn't slept all night, but there was something different in his expression, something that looked almost like hope. He said, "I wanted to thank you for yesterday, for how you handled everything." "I just did what anyone would do, mister." "No, you did more than that. You thought about how I would feel. You made sure I found out about Emma's things before the police took them away. That meant everything to me." Richard paused, as if he was trying to decide whether to say something else. "The FBI thinks Emma might still be alive," he continued. "They think someone took her and her mother, but Emma might have survived. They're going to search the entire city." Felt her heart race with excitement and hope. "That's wonderful news, mister." "I want to hire you," Richard said suddenly. Blinked in confusion. "Sir, I want to hire you to help with the search. You know this city. You know people that my investigators might never meet. You found Emma's things when no one else could. I think you might be able to help find Emma herself." Stared at Richard, not sure she had heard him correctly. "Mister, I'm just a cleaning lady. I don't know anything about finding missing people." "You know more than you think," Richard said. "You have good instincts. You care about people. And something tells me that finding Emma's belongings wasn't just a coincidence." Thought about's college fund, about the years she had spent saving every penny she could spare. She thought about the opportunity Richard was offering and about the chance to help reunite a father with his daughter. "What would you want me to do?" she asked. "Help me search. Go places my other investigators can't go. Talk to people who might not trust a private detective or an FBI agent. Be my eyes and ears in parts of Chicago where Emma might be living." Felt a strange certainty that this was what she was meant to do. She had spent years cleaning other people's offices and wondering if her life had any greater purpose. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was meant to help find Emma. "Yes, mister," she said. "I'll help you find your daughter." As spoke those words, she had no idea that this decision would change not only Richard's life, but her own life in ways she could never imagine. The search for Emma was about to begin in earnest, and Martinez was about to discover that sometimes the most important work a person can do has nothing to do with their job title or education. The search for Emma began immediately. Richard hired the best private investigation firm in Chicago and increased the FBI reward to $20 million. Every major newspaper and television station ran Emma's childhood photos alongside computer-generated images of what she might look like as a 26-year-old woman. Started her new role on Monday morning. Richard had arranged for her to work directly with Detective Sarah, the FBI's lead investigator on the case. Detective was a small, intense woman in her 40s who had specialized in missing persons cases for over 15 years. "Most missing children who disappear this long are never found alive," Detective explained during their first meeting. "But Emma's case has some unusual features that give us hope." Detective showed a map of Chicago with dozens of red pins marking locations where the FBI had received tips about Emma over the years. Most of the tips had been false leads, but some had never been properly investigated due to lack of resources. "We need someone who understands the neighborhoods," Detective continued. "Someone people will trust. The Hispanic and African American communities on the south and west sides might know something, but they're often reluctant to talk to federal agents." Studied the map carefully. Many of the red pins were in neighborhoods she knew well. Areas where she had friends, where she had worked other jobs, where had played basketball in community leagues. "Where do we start?" asked. "With the assumption that Emma is alive and living somewhere in Chicago under a different identity. If someone took her and her mother 23 years ago, they might have raised Emma as their own child. She might have no idea who she really is." This possibility both excited and terrified. If Emma was alive but didn't know her true identity, how would they find her among millions of people in Chicago? Detective had developed a strategy. They would focus on women between 25 and 27 years old who had appeared in the Chicago area around 23 years ago. Women who might have incomplete or suspicious background documentation. Women whose childhood memories seemed unclear or who had been told their parents died when they were very young. His first assignment was to visit community centers, churches, and social service organizations in the neighborhoods marked on the FBI map. She would show Emma's photograph and ask if anyone recognized her or knew of any young woman with a similar story. On Tuesday morning began her search on the South Side. Her first stop was Mary's Catholic Church, where Father had served the community for over 30 years. Father was a kind man who had helped family during the difficult time after her husband's death. "It's good to see you," Father said when she entered his office. "How is?" "He's doing well, Father. He'll graduate in the spring," showed Father the photographs of Emma. "I'm working with the police now, helping to find this missing girl. Her name is Emma." Father examined the pictures carefully. "I remember hearing about this case years ago, the billionaire's daughter who disappeared. You're working on this." Explained how she had found Emma's belongings and how Richard had asked her to help with the search. Father listened thoughtfully, occasionally glancing back at the photographs. "I don't recognize this particular girl," he said finally. "But you should talk to Maria Santos. She runs the women's shelter on 47th Street. Maria knows every family in this neighborhood, and she has a good memory for faces." Thanked Father and walked 6 blocks to the women's shelter. The building was old but well-maintained, with a small garden in front where several children were playing. Found Maria Santos in her office, surrounded by paperwork and case files. Maria was a heavyset woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. She had been working with homeless and displaced women for 20 years, helping them find housing, jobs, and support services. "Father called and said you were coming," Maria said, gesturing for to sit down. "He said you're looking for a missing girl." Showed Maria the photographs and explained Emma's story. Maria studied the pictures for a long time, holding them up to the light from her window. "You know, there was a family that came here about 22 years ago," Maria said slowly. "A woman named and her daughter. The girl was maybe 4 years old, very and blue-eyed, unusual for this neighborhood." His heart began to race. "What do you remember about them?" "Was nervous, always looking over her shoulder. She said she was running from an abusive husband. The little girl was quiet, seemed scared. Insisted on paying cash for everything, wouldn't give us any background information." Maria walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "I keep records going back 25 years. Let me see if I can find their information." After several minutes of searching, Maria found a single page with basic information about and her daughter. The girl's name was listed as, and her age was given as 4 years old. The date of their arrival at the shelter was November 3rd, 22 years ago. "That's about 6 months after Emma disappeared," said, calculating quickly. "The timing fits," Maria agreed. "But I have to tell you something else. Only stayed here for 2 weeks. Then she and the little girl left, and I never saw them again." "Do you have any idea where they went?" Maria shook her head. "Was very secretive. She didn't trust anyone. But I remember thinking at the time that there was something wrong with the situation. The little girl didn't look anything like, and she kept asking for her daddy." Felt a chill run down her spine. What did tell the girl about her father? She told that her daddy had gone away and wouldn't be coming back. The little girl cried every night for weeks. Carefully wrote down all the information Maria could remember. Had been described as a Latina woman in her 30s with dark hair and brown eyes. She spoke English with no accent but claimed to be from Mexico originally. She had money but no credit cards or bank accounts. Most importantly, she seemed terrified that someone was looking for her. "Maria, this could be very important," said. "The FBI needs to hear about this." "I'll cooperate with the investigation," Maria said. "But you should know that wasn't a bad person. She was scared, but she took good care of that little girl. Whatever happened, I don't think she meant to hurt anyone." Left the shelter and immediately called detective. Within an hour, FBI agents were at the shelter interviewing Maria and examining the old records. The agents seemed excited about this new lead, but could tell they were being cautious about getting too hopeful. Detective called that evening with an update. "We're running the name through our databases, but it's probably a false identity. The description Maria gave doesn't match Emma's mother, so we think was someone else entirely. Maybe someone who was hired to take Emma and hide her. But if Emma was only 4 when they left the shelter, she's been missing for another 22 years, pointed out. Right, we need to find out where and when they left Mary's. That's where you come in. We need you to canvass the neighborhoods around the shelter. Ask if anyone remembers seeing a woman and a little girl around that time. Spent the next 3 days visiting every business, church, and community center within a 10-mile radius of Mary's shelter. She showed Emma's photograph to hundreds of people. Most had no memory of but a few recalled seeing them. Mrs. Williams, who owned a corner grocery store, remembered because she always paid for groceries with cash and bought expensive items that most customers in the neighborhood couldn't afford. That little girl loved chocolate chip cookies, Mrs. Williams recalled. She was so polite, always said please and thank you. A mechanic named Tony remembered working on an old blue sedan that drove. She paid me in cash to fix the transmission, Tony said. Must have cost her $800, but she didn't even negotiate the price. That was unusual. The most helpful information came from his own neighbor, Mrs., who had lived in the same apartment building for 40 years. Mrs. had an excellent memory for faces and neighborhood events. Oh yes, I remember them, Mrs. said when showed her the photographs. They lived in the apartment building on Maple Street for about 6 months. The woman kept to herself, but the little girl used to play in the courtyard. Mrs. led to the building on Maple Street. It was a 3-story brick structure that had been converted into small apartments. The current manager, Mr., had only been working there for 10 years, but he was able to access old rental records stored in the basement. After an hour of searching through dusty files, Mr. found a rental agreement for Morales and her daughter. The lease was for 6 months, from December 1st to June 1st. The address listed was for apartment 2B. Can we see the apartment? Asked. Mr. led them upstairs to. The current tenant was at work, but Mr. had a master key. The apartment was small but clean, with 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that overlooked the courtyard. 22 years is a long time, Mr. said. But let me ask Mrs. who lives downstairs. She's been here for 30 years and remembers everything. Mrs. turned out to be Detective's aunt, a coincidence that surprised everyone. She was a small, elderly woman who invited and Mr. into her apartment for tea. I remember and very well, Mrs. said in accented English. Was always worried, always looking out the window, but was a sweet child. She used to draw pictures and slip them under my door. Mrs. went to a drawer in her kitchen and pulled out a small box. Inside were several crayon drawings made by a young child. The drawings showed simple houses, stick figure families, and flowers. At the bottom of each drawing, in careful child's handwriting, was the name. Examined the drawings carefully. In one picture had drawn what looked like a tall man in a suit standing next to a little girl. At the top of the page, she had written me and Daddy. Did ever talk about her father? Asked. Oh yes, Mrs. said sadly. She missed him very much. She told me her daddy was very tall and very important, and that he lived in a big house with lots of books. Would get upset whenever talked about her father. Felt her excitement growing. The description of Emma's father matched Richard perfectly. He was tall, definitely important, and his office was filled with books. Mrs., do you know where and when they moved out? Mrs.'s expression became troubled. That was very sad. One morning I heard shouting and crying from upstairs. When I looked out my window, I saw putting suitcases in a car, was crying and didn't want to leave, looked scared like someone was chasing her. Did you see where they went? They drove away heading north, but there's something else. About a week after they left, a man came looking for them. His pulse quickened. What kind of man? A well-dressed man in an expensive car. He had photographs and was asking questions about, and I didn't trust him, so I didn't tell him anything. But he seemed to know they had been living here. Mrs. described the man as being in his 50s, with graying hair and an expensive suit. He had been driving a black Mercedes and seemed very determined to find and immediately called detective with this new information. The FBI team arrived within 30 minutes and spent the rest of the day interviewing Mrs. and examining drawings. Detective was particularly interested in the man who had been looking for, and this suggests that someone else was tracking them, she explained too. Maybe the same person who originally hired to take Emma. But why would someone want to kidnap Emma and then keep tracking her for years? Asked. That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to follow the trail north and see if we can figure out where took next. The investigation team spent the following week canvassing neighborhoods north of the city. They visited gas stations, hotels, restaurants, and any other businesses where might have stopped during her escape. The break came from an unexpected source. A retired police officer named Frank had been working private security 22 years ago at a truck stop on Interstate 94. Frank had kept detailed logs of unusual incidents, including a woman and child who had seemed nervous and out of place. I remembered them because they didn't belong, Frank explained to an detective. The woman was dressed too nicely for a truck stop, and she was paying for everything with cash. The little girl kept asking when they could go home. Frank's log showed that and had stopped at the truck stop on June 3rd, the same day their lease expired on Maple Street. According to Frank's notes, had been asking for directions to Wisconsin. She wanted to know the best route to Milwaukee, Frank said. I told her to take I-94 west, but she seemed confused about where exactly she was going. This information led the FBI to expand their search into Wisconsin. Volunteered to continue helping with the investigation, even though it meant traveling outside of Chicago. Richard arranged for her to take a leave of absence from her cleaning job and provided her with a salary that was 3 times what she had been earning. I want you to focus completely on finding Emma, Richard told. Money is no object, just bring my daughter home. Detective and 2 other FBI agents drove to Milwaukee the following Monday. They began their search in the areas where and were most likely to have gone. Neighborhoods with affordable housing, communities with support services for single mothers, areas where they could blend in and avoid attention. Their first stop was the Milwaukee Department of Social Services. The supervisor, Williams, was cooperative but cautious about sharing information from 22 years ago. We can look through our records, said, but you have to understand that many people who come to us don't use their real names. If this woman was trying to hide, she probably gave us false information. The search through social services records took 2 days. Finally, they found a case file for Morales and her daughter, who had applied for emergency housing assistance in June 22 years ago. According to the file, had claimed to be fleeing domestic violence and had requested help finding a safe place to live. Social services had placed them in a transitional housing facility for 6 months while looked for permanent housing and employment. The transitional facility was still operating, now under the name New Hope Housing. The current director had been working there for 25 years and remembered and clearly. Was different from our usual clients, explained. She had money and education, but she was terrified of something, was a beautiful child, very smart and well-behaved, but she was obviously traumatized. Led them to the facility's archive room and pulled out its file. The information was more detailed than what they had found in Chicago. Had listed her previous address as Chicago, but claimed to be originally from San, Texas. She had provided references from employers in Chicago, but when the FBI checked, those businesses had never existed. Worked here for about 4 months, continued. She helped with an administrative work, but she was always nervous, always watching the parking lot like she expected someone to find her. Do you know where they went when they left here? Asked. His expression became sad. That's the strange part. One day just disappeared. She left all their belongings behind and took in the middle of the night. We never heard from them again. The FBI team examined the belongings that had left behind. Most items were generic clothing and personal effects, but there was one significant discovery. Hidden in the lining of a suitcase, detective found a small address book. The address book contained phone numbers and addresses for locations across the Midwest. Most entries were written in code, but one page had been torn out. On the remaining pages, the agents found references to contacts in Detroit, Minneapolis, and Kansas City. This suggests was part of some kind of network, detective explained, too. Maybe people who specialized in helping others disappear. The investigation was becoming more complex and dangerous. If was working with professional criminals who specialized in hiding people, then finding would be much more difficult than anyone had imagined. Was beginning to understand that this case was about more than just a missing child. Emma had been taken by people who knew how to make others disappear permanently. They had resources, connections, and experience in staying hidden, but was not discouraged. Every clue they discovered brought them closer to Emma. Every person they interviewed added another piece to the puzzle. Felt certain that Emma was still alive somewhere, probably living under the name, probably with no memory of her real father or her life before age 4. The question was whether they could find her before the people who had taken her realized that their 23-year-old secret was finally being exposed. Detective gathered the team for a strategy meeting that evening. "We're dealing with professionals here," she said. "People who have been hiding Emma for over 2 decades. They probably have contingency plans in case anyone gets too close to the truth." "What does that mean for Emma?" asked. "It means we have to be very careful. If these people realize we're closing in, they might move Emma again or worse. We can't let them know how much we've discovered." Thought about Emma, now 26 years old, living somewhere under the name with no idea that her father had never stopped looking for her. She thought about Richard, who had spent 23 years hopping for exactly the kind of breakthrough they were now experiencing. "What's our next step?" asked. Detectives spread out a map showing the locations mentioned in Cedrest's book. "We follow the trail, but this time we have to be smarter. We need to find without alerting the people who took her." Looked at the map and felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They were closer to finding Emma than anyone had been in over 20 years. But they were also entering dangerous territory, pursuing people who had successfully hidden a child for decades. As stared at the map, she made a silent promise to Richard and to Emma herself. She would not give up. She would follow this investigation wherever it led, no matter how dangerous it became. The search for led and the FBI team to Detroit, where Cedrest's book had listed 3 different contacts. The first 2 addresses turned out to be dead ends, buildings that had been demolished years ago and businesses that had never existed. But the third address led them to a small apartment building in a quiet residential neighborhood. The building superintendent, an elderly man named Albert, had been working there for 30 years. When showed him the photographs of and, his eyes widened with recognition. "Oh yes, I remember them," Albert said. "But they didn't stay long, maybe 3 or 4 months. The woman was always paying rent in cash, always kept to herself." Albert led them to apartment 3A, which was currently empty. The small space looked exactly like dozens of other temporary hiding places had used over the years. Anonymous, forgettable, easy to abandon quickly. "What I remember most was the little girl," Albert continued. "She was maybe 5 years old by then, very quiet and sad. She used to sit by the window for hours like she was waiting for someone." Felt her heart breaking as she imagined Emma as a confused 5-year-old, not understanding why she had been taken from her father or why she couldn't go home. "Did they leave any forwarding information?" Detective asked. Albert shook his head. "Just disappeared one night, but there was something strange. About a week after they left, a man came looking for them, same thing that happened in Milwaukee." This confirmed Detective's theory that was being pursued by someone else, probably the same person who had originally hired her to take Emma. But who was this mysterious pursuer, and why had they been tracking for years? The investigation team spent 3 days in Detroit, interviewing neighbors and searching for any additional clues. They discovered that had worked part-time at a local laundromat and that had attended kindergarten for 2 months at a nearby elementary school. The kindergarten teacher, Mrs., was now retired but still lived in Detroit. She remembered clearly because of her unusual behavior and advanced reading skills. Was obviously very intelligent, Mrs. told, but she seemed confused about basic things like her last name and where she was from. When I asked her to draw a picture of her family, she drew herself with 2 different women and a man who wasn't there. Mrs. had kept school records and artwork from that time. In one drawing had written, "I miss my real daddy," in careful 5-year-old handwriting. In another, she had drawn a tall building and labeled it Daddy's Work. Studied the drawing of the tall building. It looked remarkably similar to the Millennium Tower where Richard worked. Even at age 5, Emma had retained memories of her father's office building. The kindergarten records showed that had been enrolled under the full name Morales, with listed as her mother and no father mentioned. But there was one significant detail. Emergency contact was listed as someone named Maria Santos in Minneapolis. "Maria Santos," said to detective. "That was the name of the woman who ran the shelter in Chicago, but this is a different Maria Santos in Minneapolis. Detective ran the Minneapolis Maria Santos through FBI databases and discovered that she was Morales's sister. Maria Santos owned a small restaurant in Minneapolis and had been living there for over 20 years. The team drove to Minneapolis the next day. Maria Santos's restaurant, called Comida Familiar, was located in a predominantly Latino neighborhood on the east side. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd when a detective arrived. Maria Santos was a woman in her 50s who looked remarkably similar to the descriptions they had heard of. When showed her the photographs and explained their investigation, Maria's face went pale. "I need to close the restaurant," Maria said quietly. "This conversation cannot happen here." Maria sent her employees home early and locked the restaurant doors. Then she led a detective to a small office behind the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she poured coffee for everyone. "I've been waiting for this day for 23 years, Maria said finally. "I've been terrified that someone would come asking about and—" "You know who they really are," detective said. It wasn't a question. Maria nodded slowly. "Is my younger sister, her real name is Flores, and is Emma." Felt the room spinning around her. After months of investigation and following leads across multiple states, they had finally found someone who knew the complete truth. "Where is Emma now?" detective asked urgently. Maria was crying now, wiping her eyes with a kitchen towel. "She's safe. She's been safe all these years, but she doesn't know who she really is." "We need you to tell us everything," detective said gently. "Start from the beginning." Maria took several deep breaths before beginning her story. 23 years ago, was working as a nanny for wealthy families in Chicago. She was trying to save money to bring our parents from Mexico to the United States. Maria explained that had been hired by a woman named to help take care of her daughter Emma. Was going through a bitter divorce and was terrified that her ex-husband would win custody of Emma. Was desperate, Maria continued. She was convinced that Richard would use his money and power to take Emma away from her. She had already lost several court battles and she was running out of options. According to Maria, had developed a plan to disappear with Emma and start a new life somewhere far from Chicago. But she needed help because she was too recognizable and had too many connections to Richard's world. Asked to help her disappear, she offered $50,000 to take Emma and hide with her until could join them. Was beginning to understand the tragic sequence of events. Hadn't intended to abandon Emma forever. She had planned to reunite with her daughter once she was safely hidden from Richard's influence. "What happened to?" detective asked. Maria's tears increased. "There was a car accident, was supposed to meet an Emma in Milwaukee after 2 weeks, but she never arrived. We found out later that she had been killed in a car crash on her way to meet them." The room fell silent as an detective absorbed this information. Had died trying to reunite with her daughter, leaving Emma stranded with, who had only agreed to help temporarily. Was supposed to give Emma back to her mother, Maria continued. When died, didn't know what to do. She was terrified that if she returned Emma to Richard, she would be arrested for kidnapping. So she kept running, said. Yes, thought she was protecting Emma and herself, but then other people started looking for them, people who weren't police or private investigators. Maria explained that had been involved with dangerous people before her death, people who had helped her plan her disappearance and who didn't want their involvement discovered. These people wanted to make sure Emma never surfaced and told anyone about what had happened. They've been hunting Emma for 23 years, trying to silence them permanently. This revelation explained why had been so paranoid and why she had kept moving from place to place. They weren't just hiding from Richard or the police. They were hiding from criminals who wanted to eliminate them as witnesses. "Maria, where is Emma now?" detective asked again. Maria hesitated for a long moment, clearly torn between her desire to protect her sister and her understanding that the truth needed to come out. "She's here in Minneapolis," Maria said finally. "She's been living here for 15 years, decided to stop running when turned 11. They've been using the name Morales and Emma thinks is her mother." Felt her heart racing. Emma was alive, living in Minneapolis under an assumed identity, with no idea that her real father had been searching for her for over 2 decades. "We need to see her," detective said. "You can't just approach her," Maria said urgently. Emma has been told that her father abandoned her and her mother when she was small. She believes her mother died in a car accident when she was 11, and that is her aunt who took her in. If you suddenly tell her the truth, it could destroy her psychologically. Maria explained that Emma, now 26 years old and still going by, was working as a nurse at County Medical Center. She lived in a small apartment near the hospital and had never married or had children. According to Maria, Emma was a kind and intelligent young woman who volunteered at homeless shelters and donated money to charities for missing children. She has no memory of her life before age 4, Maria said. Told her that she had been in a car accident that caused memory loss. Emma has always felt like something was missing from her life, but she's never suspected the truth. Detective was already making phone calls to the FBI office in Minneapolis. Within 2 hours, a full surveillance team was watching Emma's apartment and workplace. The agents were careful to remain invisible while they gathered information about Emma's current life. Asked Maria if she could see recent photographs of Emma. Maria reluctantly showed them pictures from Emma's nursing school graduation and from family gatherings at the restaurant. Gasped when she saw the photographs. Even after 23 years, Emma looked remarkably similar to her childhood pictures. She had the same bright blue eyes and hair, the same gentle smile. But there was something sad in her expression, as if she was carrying a weight she couldn't understand. "She's beautiful," whispered. "She looks just like her father." The FBI surveillance team reported that Emma lived a quiet, routine life. She worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, came home to her small apartment, and spent evenings reading or watching movies. On weekends, she volunteered at a homeless shelter and visited Maria at the restaurant. Detective developed a careful plan for approaching Emma. Rather than shocking her with the complete truth immediately, they would gradually introduce the idea that her past might be different from what she had been told. "We'll start by having make contact," Detective explained. "Can pose as someone researching missing persons cases. She can show Emma some photographs and see if anything triggers memories." Was nervous about this responsibility. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been built on a lie? How do you explain that the woman they thought was their mother was actually their kidnapper? How do you tell them that their real father has been searching for them for 23 years? The plan was put into action on a Thursday morning. Waited in the lobby of County Medical Center until Emma finished her shift. When Emma walked toward the exit, approached her carefully. "Excuse me, are you Morales?" asked. Emma turned and smiled politely. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Introduced herself as someone working with families of missing children. She explained that she was researching cold cases and wondered if might recognize any of the people in some old photographs. Emma agreed to look at the pictures. Carefully showed her several photos, including pictures of other missing children, before showing her the photographs of herself as a 3-year-old. Emma stared at the childhood photos for a long time. Her hand began to shake slightly as she held the pictures. "This little girl," Emma said quietly. "She looks familiar somehow. What happened to her?" "She disappeared 23 years ago," said gently. "Her name was Emma. Her father has been looking for her ever since." Emma continued studying the photographs. Could see something changing in her expression, as if long-buried memories were trying to surface. Emma repeated slowly. "That name, I've heard that name before, in dreams maybe." His heart was pounding, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Do you remember anything from when you were very young? Anything before your car accident?" Emma looked up with confusion in her eyes. "How did you know about my car accident? I've never told anyone except family about that." "I think we need to talk more privately. There are some things about your past that you deserve to know." Emma agreed to meet the following day at a quiet coffee shop near the hospital. Called Detective immediately after Emma left. "She recognized something in the photographs," reported. "I think her memories are starting to come back." That evening, Detective received authorization from FBI headquarters to reveal Emma's true identity. A team of psychologists and counselors was assembled to help Emma process the shocking truth about her life. Richard was called with the news that his daughter had been found. Had never heard a grown man cry the way Richard cried during that phone call. 23 years of grief, hope, and love poured out in that moment. "When can I see her?" Richard asked through his tears. "When can I see my Emma?" "Soon," Detective promised. But we have to be careful. She's been told her entire life that you abandoned her. We need to help her understand the truth gradually. The next day met Emma at the coffee shop. Emma looked tired and confused, as if she hadn't slept well. "I've been having strange dreams," Emma said. "Dreams about a tall man reading me stories, dreams about a big house with lots of windows. I haven't had dreams like that since I was a child." Took a deep breath and began to tell Emma the truth. She explained about Richard, about the custody battle, about's desperate plan to hide with Emma. She explained about's good intentions and about the car accident that had changed everything. Emma listened in stunned silence, as revealed that her entire life had been built around a terrible misunderstanding. That the woman she thought was her aunt was actually a stranger who had been hiding her from her real father. That her real father had never stopped looking for her and had never stopped loving her. "My father," Emma whispered, "my real father has been alive all this time." "He's been searching for you every day for 23 years, said. "He never gave up hope that you were alive somewhere." Emma began to cry, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, as if a weight she had carried her entire life was finally being lifted. "I always felt like something was missing," Emma said. "I always felt like I didn't quite belong anywhere. Now I understand why." Arranged for Emma to meet with FBI counselors who specialized in helping kidnapping victims reunite with their families. The process would take time and careful psychological support, but Emma was eager to begin recovering her true identity. 3 days later, stood in the lobby of the Millennium Tower as Richard waited for the elevator that would bring his daughter to him. 23 years after Emma had disappeared, father and daughter were about to be reunited. When the elevator doors opened and Emma stepped out, Richard couldn't speak. He just stared at the beautiful young woman who was his daughter, grown up but still recognizable as the 3-year-old he had lost. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, using a word she hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Richard opened his arms, and Emma walked into the hug she had been unconsciously waiting for her entire life. They held each other and cried as watched from across the lobby, tears streaming down her own face. The reunion between Richard and Emma was everything it hoped for and more. Despite 23 years of separation, the bond between father and daughter had never been broken. Emma's memories of her early childhood began returning quickly once she was back in her father's presence. Richard learned about Emma's life as her work as a nurse, her volunteer activities, and her dreams for the future. Emma learned about her father's never-ending search, his preservation of her childhood bedroom, and his unwavering love for her. Was arrested, but received a light sentence when the full story of her involvement became known. The prosecutors understood that she had been trying to protect Emma, not harm her. The dangerous people who had been hunting Emma were eventually identified and prosecuted for their involvement in its original disappearance plan. 6 months after the reunion, Richard offered a permanent position working with the foundation he established to help find missing children. Accepted, knowing that her experience finding Emma had given her a new purpose in life. Received a full scholarship to study engineering, funded by Richard's foundation. Was proud to watch her son graduate from high school knowing that his future was secure and that her sacrifice in searching for Emma had been worthwhile. Emma legally changed her name back to Emma, but kept Morales as her middle name to honor the woman who had protected her for so many years. She continued working as a nurse while gradually rebuilding her relationship with her father. A year after their reunion, Emma and Richard established the Emma Foundation for Missing Children. Served as the foundation's director of community outreach, using her experience and connections to help other families find their missing loved ones. The foundation's first major success came when they helped reunite a mother with her son who had been missing for 8 years. Led the investigation that located the boy living with his father in another state, unaware that his mother had been searching for him. As worked on that case, she reflected on how much her life had changed since the morning she found Emma's belongings in a dumpster behind the Millennium Tower. She had gone from being an invisible cleaning lady to being someone who reunited families and gave hope to people who had lost everything. Emma often told people that was the guardian angel who had brought her home, but knew that she had received just as much as she had given. Finding Emma had shown that everyone's life has purpose and meaning, regardless of their job title or education or economic status. The most important work had learned was the work of caring for other people and never giving up on hope. Sometimes that work involved cleaning offices and supporting a family. Sometimes it involved searching across multiple states to find a missing child. But it was all important work, and it all mattered. On the second anniversary of their reunion, Richard and Emma invited to a special dinner at Richard's mansion. The dining room was decorated with photographs showing Emma's life from childhood through the present day. Some pictures showed Emma as a 3-year-old with her father. Others showed as a teenager with. The pictures showed Emma and Richard together again, father and daughter reunited. Richard said during dinner, "I want you to know that finding Emma was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me back my daughter and my future." Emma nodded and took's hand. "You saved both of us. You saved me from living my whole life not knowing who I really was, and you saved my father from spending the rest of his life wondering what happened to me." Looked around the table at the family she had helped heal and the life she had helped rebuild. Was there too, now a sophomore in college studying to become a civil engineer. He was proud of his mother's work and often helped with foundation events. As sat in Richard's mansion, surrounded by the family she had brought together, she thought about the morning when she had heard the garbage workers talking in the alley behind the Millennium Tower. If she had minded her own business and ignored their conversation, Emma might never have been found. Richard would have continued his lonely search forever, and Emma would have lived her entire life not knowing her true identity. But had chosen to investigate. She had chosen to care about other people's problems. She had chosen to help, even when she didn't have to and even when it seemed like an impossible task. That choice had changed everything. It had reunited a father with his daughter, given Emma back her true identity, secured education, and provided with meaningful work that helped other families find hope. Realized that every person has the power to change lives, regardless of their circumstances or background. The most important qualification for helping others is simply the willingness to care and the determination to never give up. As the evening ended and prepared to go home to her apartment, Emma hugged her tightly. "Thank you for finding me," Emma whispered. "Thank you for bringing me home." Hugged Emma back and smiled. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story." As rode the bus home that night, she looked out at the lights of Chicago and thought about all the families in the city who were still searching for their missing loved ones. Tomorrow, she would return to work at the Emma Foundation, ready to help the next family find their way back to each other. Martinez had started as a cleaning lady who found a box of toys in a dumpster. She had become the woman who reunited a billionaire with his missing daughter and discovered that the most important treasures in life aren't found in mansions or bank accounts. They're found in the connections between people who care about each other and the hope that love can overcome any distance, any time, and any circumstances that try to keep families apart. Emma was out there somewhere, and Martinez was going to find her. Sometimes, the most important work comes from simply caring enough to look for the truth.